As one of the very first playable characters ever in a Resident Evil game, Jill Valentine holds a special place in the hearts of series fans. It's been a while since we last saw her, with the 3DS's Resident Evil Revelations in 2012 being the last time she was featured in an RE story in any meaningful capacity. But soon, we'll be stepping into her shoes again. The Resident Evil 3 remake is almost upon us, which means Jill will once again be taking up almost all of the spotlight. In anticipation of her arrival, here, we'll be tracking her full story throughout the course of the entire series. Given that Resident Evil 3's remake will be the first time many players will be experiencing the game, we'll let you know when we're about to begin covering the game's events and everything that follows, so you can avoid those spoilers if you wish. With that out of the way, let's get started. Back during the early 1990s, Jill Valentine was in the US Army, where her specialization in bomb disposal and her talents for lockpicking, among other things, saw her quickly rising through the ranks and attracting the attention of many. One person whose eye she caught was a certain someone named Dr. Albert Wesker, who would go on to see her talents and recruit her as an agent of the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, or STARS Division, within the Raccoon Police Department. Alongside Chris Redfield, Barry Burton, Brad Vickers, Joseph Frost, and Albert Wesker himself, Jill was part of STARS Alpha Team. July 1998 would see STARS being assigned their most pivotal mission ever. The preceding summer, reports of cannibalistic attacks and attacks from crazed dogs began emerging, taking place in the Arklay Mountains just outside of Raccoon City. As the situation continued to escalate, RPD eventually dispatched STARS Bravo Team to the mountains to investigate what was happening. But when contact with Bravo Team was lost, Alpha Team had to go in after them. What the Alpha Team didn't know was that their own leader, Albert Wesker, was a double agent and had been working with Umbrella Corporation for quite a long time, who were responsible for the strange incidents in the Arklay Mountains. By the time Alpha Team were dispatched by RPD to investigate these incidents, Umbrella had come to the realization that things were spiraling out of their control. What most at that point weren't aware of was that these incidents were the result of sabotage caused by one Dr. James Marcus. Marcus, one of the co-founders of Umbrella, had been betrayed and murdered by Wesker and fellow Umbrella employee Dr. William Birkin 10 years ago as part of an internal power struggle. But when he died, he was infected by the very virus he'd been working on. The virus would absorb, for lack of a better word, all of Marcus's memories, and believing itself to be the actual James Marcus would become hell-bent on revenge. Without going into the nitty-gritties, which are explained in Resident Evil 0, Marcus set his sights on the Spencer Mansion, owned by fellow Umbrella co-founder Dr. Oswell Spencer, in the Arklay Mountains, because the mansion was hiding a secret laboratory underground, which had been used to create many BOWs using the T-Virus, which incidentally Marcus himself had created many years ago. It was through Marcus's actions ultimately that the virus broke out in the lab and in the mansion, leading to the incidents in the mountains. And so by the time the STARS teams were dispatched to the mountains, Umbrella knew that things had started spiraling out of control, and that as such, any investigations into these events, which were bound to happen, would throw a wrench into their plans and out their illegal activities. Enter Wesker, who was told by Umbrella to lead the STARS Alpha Team astray in their mission and sacrifice them to the results of Umbrella's experiments in order to not only remove any potential witnesses, but also to provide Umbrella with combat data on their BOWs. Wesker was also told to recover the embryos of all the BOWs that Umbrella had developed, and to destroy the Umbrella laboratory under the Spencer Mansion in the Arklay Mountains to remove any traces of evidence. But enough context, let's get back to Jill. After being dispatched the day after RPD lost contact with Bravo Team, Alpha Team's chopper spotted Bravo Team's crashed chopper in the forest below them from the air, and landed there themselves. They barely got any time to investigate it though, because almost immediately they were attacked by a pack of monstrous zombified dogs. In the attack, one of their squad members, Joseph Frost, was killed. Alpha Team's chopper pilot, Brad Vickers, panicked. He ran back to the chopper and took off, fleeing and leaving the rest of Alpha Team stranded in the forest. As luck would have it, this would force them to seek refuge in a nearby abandoned mansion. You guessed it, the Spencer Mansion. The mansion, as you might have guessed, had seen better days, seeing as it was completely overrun by zombies and creatures infected by the T-Virus, courtesy of Dr. Marcus, who by this point was definitively dead, killed in combat by STARS Bravo Team survivor Rebecca Chambers. Throughout the course of Resident Evil 1, Jill, or Chris if you play as him, but we're focusing on Jill here, uncovers many truths, from the true nature of the Spencer Mansion to the illicit activity activities of Umbrella Corporation. Jill also had an encounter with another survivor of Bravo Team, their leader Enrico Marini, who warned her that one of Alpha Team's members was a traitor. Before he could tell her who it was, he was shot and killed by an unseen shooter. For a while, circumstances led Jill to suspect that the traitor is their weapons supervisor, Barry Burton, and she quickly found out who the actual traitor was. She eventually made her way to the underground lab where she found Chris Redfield in a cell, and also found Albert Wesker, who revealed to her that he'd been the double agent all along. There, Wesker programmed a T-002 Tyrant, a deadly bioweapon created using the T-Virus, to kill all members of Alpha Team. What Wesker didn't foresee was that the Tyrant would attack him as well. It would stab him through the chest, killing him, or so Jill and Chris thought, before turning its attention to Chris and Jill. Jill was able to defeat and kill the Tyrant after an arduous fight. Immediately afterward, though, the lab's self-destruct sequence was triggered, forcing all surviving STARS members to flee in a helicopter, while the lab was destroyed in the resulting explosion. When they returned to Raccoon City, STARS survivors Chris, Jill, Barry, and Rebecca reported what they had discovered at Spencer Mansion to the Chief of Police, Brian Irons, and requested that he launch a full-scale investigation into Umbrella. What they didn't know was that Irons too was in Umbrella's pocket and was working behind the scenes with Umbrella's Dr. William Birkin. Any investigation into Umbrella's activities would be against his own interests, and so he refused. Realizing that they would receive no help from the authorities, Chris, Jill, Barry, and Rebecca decided to take matters into their own hands. To that end, by the end of September 1998, 2 months after the Spencer Mansion incident, Chris, Rebecca, and Barry had all left Raccoon City for various places, while Jill decided to stay behind, at least temporarily, to uncover the location of Nest, a secret Umbrella laboratory hidden under Raccoon City. Her investigation was quickly cut short, however, when Raccoon City itself was torn apart by an outbreak of the T-Virus. This is where we begin talking about the events of Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, and the games that follow in the series chronology. If the upcoming remake will be your first time playing through this story and you'd rather not have that stuff spoiled for you, this is where you should stop. The T-Virus Outbreak, as you'd expect, completely devastated Raccoon City. A huge chunk of its population was either killed or infected. The streets were teeming with zombies or zombified monsters, and everything quickly descended into chaos. After being trapped in her apartment for a few days, Jill realized that she needed to escape from the city immediately. Leaving her apartment, she made for the RPD building. She encountered fellow STARS member Brad Vickers on the way, but right outside the police station they were attacked by a hulking monstrosity, a bioweapon codenamed Nemesis. Created by Umbrella by infecting a T-103 Tyrant with the NEA virus, Nemesis was an intelligent, durable, and deadly BOW who'd been sent into Raccoon City with one mission: to track down and kill all STARS members who were witnesses to Umbrella's devious shenanigans at the Spencer Mansion, and who'd also succeeded in taking down their operation there. Nemesis immediately impaled Brad with a tentacle, infecting him with the T-Virus, which would ultimately kill him, while Jill made a run for it and entered the RPD building. There, in the STARS office, she heard a transmission on the radio coming from a man named Carlos Oliveira, who was requesting backup. With Nemesis still in pursuit, Jill fled from the station, and after fighting her way through the city streets, which were teeming with the infected, she eventually ran into the man on the radio. Carlos told her that he's a member of the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, who had deployed a squad of soldiers to Raccoon City to allegedly help rescue the city's population. Jill, knowing what Umbrella was really all about, knew that that was definitely not why they had been actually deployed to the city, and she was right. Unbeknownst to Carlos and his fellow UBSC soldiers, well, all except one, but we'll get to that, they were actually little more than sacrificial lambs, and had been sent to the city so that they could engage with the BOWs there and thus be unwitting participants in a test meant to yield data on the BOWs' combat capabilities. Jill immediately mistrusted Carlos for understandable reasons, but Carlos told her that he was just a mercenary, and that he neither knew nor cared what Umbrella were really up to. All he wants is to find a way out of the city. Jill, understanding that she had to use any opportunity presented to her so she could escape the city and in turn Nemesis, reluctantly agreed to work with Carlos. The two of them made their way over to a tram car, where Jill met the rest of Carlos's squad, comprised of Nikolai Zinoviev and their squad leader Mikhail Victor, who was already injured quite badly when Jill met him. There, Nikolai told Jill that if they could make it to the Raccoon City clock tower and then ring the tower's bell, they'd be able to signal an extraction chopper to fly in. The safest way to get to the tower was using using the tram itself, and so Jill, Carlos, and Nikolai set out to look for parts that they needed to get the tram running again. Soon, Nikolai was caught in an explosion caused under strange circumstances, and Jill presumed him to be dead. Eventually, Jill, Carlos, and the injured Mikhail managed to get the tram moving again, but were immediately attacked by Nemesis, who broke into the tram. Mikhail made a stand against Nemesis, which culminated with him sacrificing himself with a grenade, blowing Nemesis right out of the tram with the resulting explosion, but of course not killing him. Upon arriving at the clock tower, Jill and Carlos successfully managed to ring its bell and call in the extraction chopper. Nemesis, however, arrived on the scene once again and used his rocket launcher to blow it to smithereens, before then turning his attention to Jill. In the ensuing fight, he stabbed her with a tentacle. Carlos intervened and fought Nemesis off, destroying his rocket launcher and injuring it enough to temporarily make it stumble away. Infected with the T-Virus, Jill was unconscious for 2 days, with Carlos keeping watch over her, before he made his way to Raccoon General Hospital. That hospital, as it turned out, had also been an umbrella-funded front for the pharmaceutical company's experiments. Thankfully, though, that funding also meant that resting inside the hospital was a vaccine for the virus, which Carlos was able to administer to Jill, healing her and destroying the virus inside her, though not completely, but we'll get to that later. Carlos also discovered that Nikolai hadn't actually died and had actually faked his death. Realizing that he was probably up to no good, he gave Jill this information. The two then split up for a while, with Jill heading back into the city, this time heading into Raccoon Park, to search for a way out of the city yet again. At the park, though, she encountered Nikolai, which was when she finally found out what the deal with him was all along. Nikolai revealed to her that he'd been sent in as part of a group called the Supervisors, and that his mission was to observe the combat effects of all the infected in Raccoon City, as well as BOWs sent into the city by Umbrella. Their encounter was interrupted when Jill was attacked by a giant mutated millipede known as Gravedigger. While Nikolai took this chance to flee, Jill engaged the Gravedigger in a fight and was able to kill it by electrocuting it. Soon afterward, Jill reunited with Carlos, who told her he discovered that the US government was going to launch a nuke on Raccoon City to eradicate any traces of the virus and stop the infection from spreading further, which meant that the two of them needed to get the hell out of Dodge ASAP. In Resident Evil 3's climactic conclusion, Jill, in a final encounter with Nemesis, was able to attack him with an experimental US Army rail cannon, before finally finishing him off with a couple of magnum rounds, finally allowing her and Carlos to escape while Raccoon City was completely vaporized by a nuke. We now jump ahead to 2003, 5 years after Raccoon City's destruction, to events portrayed in Resident Evil: The Umbrella Chronicles. Though much of Umbrella Chronicles retells the stories of Resident Evil 0, 1, and 3, its fourth scenario covers new events, which saw Jill and Chris heading to Russia to investigate one of the Umbrella's facilities there, as part of their attempts to bring the organization down. Here they also had an encounter with Albert Wesker, with the events ultimately leading to Umbrella's secrets being exposed, thus allowing the US government to bring legal action to the corporation and its top officials, ultimately bringing it down. The fall of Umbrella would only lead to even more global trouble, though. Many of the corporation's rogue employees would go on to steal its bioweapon samples and sell them on the black market. And with the rapid worldwide spread of bioweapons and the chaos that ensued from that, steps had to be taken to put a stop to it all. One such step was the setting up of the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, or the BSAA, of which Jill and Chris became one of 11 original members. We now head into the events of Resident Evil Revelations. This is a game whose story is full of conspiracies, counter-conspiracies, double agents, betrayals, and what have you. So to save you some confusion and a headache, let's just briefly go over the gist of it all. In 2004, the city of Terra Grigia was attacked and occupied by bioterrorist organization Il Vetro, who would also go on to threaten to infect 1/5 of the world's oceans with the T-Abyss virus, which, as its name suggests, descended from the T-Virus. The Federal Bioterrorism Commission, or the FBC, and the BSAA were both involved in attempts to prevent that from happening and bringing Il Vetro down. However, it eventually came to light that the FBC had been working with Il Vetro all along and had helped them create the T-Abyss virus in an effort to increase the FBC's funding and international influence. Together, Chris and Jill were able to foil the FBC's plans, and also procured and released evidence of their wrongdoings, resulting in it being dissolved. world. We now jump ahead to 2006. By this time, Dr. Oswell Spencer, the head honcho of the now defunct Umbrella Corporation, had been the target of a worldwide manhunt for 3 years, but had managed to elude authorities. In 2006, the BSAA received intelligence of his location in an attempt to arrest him and also hoping to learn the location of Albert Wesker from him, who was also the target of a global manhunt. Jill and Chris headed to that location. As luck would have it, there they ran into Wesker himself, who as it turned out had already killed Spencer. Wesker, having injected himself with a prototype virus years ago, now enjoyed super strength and speed due to mutations in his body, which gave him the upper hand when Jill and Chris took him on. The fight would culminate in Jill charging at Wesker and taking both him and herself out a window and down a steep cliff. BSAA forces would search the area, but neither of them would be found. Both were presumed dead, but of course, they weren't dead. Jill was kept alive by Wesker in a comatose state. By now, Wesker had decided upon a plan that boiled down essentially to world domination. He planned to unleash Ouroboros, a virus created using the progenitor virus, which in turn was the original virus the T-Virus had spawned from. He would unleash Ouroboros on the world, kill most of its population, and rule over the survivors, ushering in a new and superior age of humanity. For this, he would conduct tests on various subjects. Wesker originally intended for Jill to be one of those subjects, which surely would have meant her death. Ironically, it was her encounter with Nemesis all those years ago that would save her from that fate, after Nemesis infected her with the T-Virus in Raccoon City back in 1998. Though Carlos was able to heal her using a vaccine, a strain of the virus was still able to survive inside of her. Over the years, it would continue to mutate and lie dormant, and when she fell into a coma, it finally reactivated. Jill's body, however, quickly fought off the virus, creating antibodies, and in turn a strong resistance to the progenitor virus and all of its strains. This meant that she would be useless as a test subject for Wesker. He instead decided to keep her around and keep injecting her with new strains of the progenitor virus, so that she would keep fighting it off with new antibodies, which he would then harvest and use to create even more optimized strains of the progenitor virus for his Ouroboros project. Instead, he made her a test subject of the P30 project, which, using a drug derived from research on the progenitor virus, made its subjects more susceptible to suggestion, which in simple terms means that they could be mind-controlled. Wesker strapped a device onto Jill that would regularly inject her with the drug, and she became an unwitting and unwilling party to Wesker's plans going forward. So what else was Wesker up to? He teamed up with Tricell, a multi-industrial global conglomerate. More specifically, he teamed up with Tricell Africa's CEO, Excella Gion, who shared his vision of a superior form of humanity. The two of them would also enlist Tricell researcher Ricardo Irving to their cause. 3 years later, in 2009, the BSAA dispatched Chris and his partner Shiva Alamar to Kijuju in Africa, tasked with capturing Ricardo Irving, who intelligence suggested was preparing to sell BOWs on the black market. During their attempts to capture Irving, they were repeatedly stopped by a hooded figure, who they were unaware was actually Jill, what with her being presumed dead and all. They ultimately managed to track down and kill Irving, and soon afterward discovered that Wesker was working with Tricell, and that Tricell's Excella Gion was planning on launching missiles containing the Ouroboros virus across the globe. They set off in pursuit of Gion, but they were stopped by the hooded figure once again, who this time was fully revealed to them as Jill. Though Gioni managed to escape, Chris and Shiva managed to subdue Jill in a fight, before removing the device Wesker had strapped onto her, finally freeing her of his control. Chris and Shiva continued their pursuit of Gion, who unbeknownst to herself had been infected by Wesker with Ouroboros. The virus took hold of her, mutating her into a deadly monster, though Chris and Shiva successfully managed to defeat and kill her as well. They pressed on in pursuit of Wesker, which was when Valentine's years of captivity and being mind-controlled by him proved to be useful. In those years, she discovered that though Wesker had essentially gained superpowers by injecting himself with a prototype virus many years ago, he also had to regularly keep administering that virus into himself to maintain those powers. The catch was, that demanded a very specific dosage, and anything even slightly less or more than that dosage would prove to be poisonous. Jill provided this information to Chris and Shiva, who had managed to get a hold of vials of the virus from Gioni before killing her. In a climactic fight against Wesker that escalates to the point that the three of them find themselves inside of a volcano, Chris and Shiva injected Wesker with large doses of the virus before getting onto a chopper piloted by Jill and Shiva's former mentor Josh Stone. A combination of being weakened by the doses, being burned alive by lava, and being hit with rounds fired from an RPG proved to be fatal, for real this time, and Albert Wesker finally died. Chronologically, Resident Evil 5's ending was the last time we saw Jill, though she was briefly featured in Resident Evil Revelations 2 as well, revealing what happened to her afterward. Given the fact that she'd been exposed to a great deal more viruses than you can count on your fingers over the years, and that she had been experimented on by Wesker for many years, Jill was taken to a BSAA lab to undergo tests. In an email written to Barry Burton, Jill would tell him that she was eager to be done with her rehabilitation, so that she could be back in the field as quickly as possible. Up until this moment, that is the full story of Jill Valentine from beginning to end. There's no telling when we'll see the next step of her story in Resident Evil's chronology, but we will be revisiting one of her most iconic and memorable arcs very soon. Resident Evil 3 is almost here, and soon we'll be stepping into Jill's shoes once again, as she runs around Raccoon City being chased by the hulking Nemesis. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, please hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to switch on the notifications bell icon next to it. That way you'll never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.